And welcome to another video. And today it is the 28th of January, and today I will be doing a quick update on the situation in and around Bakhmut. Start out with the south and just work our way up to the north. So starting out in the south, we've had the Russians over the past few days incrementally advancing along the water canal, which starts in Donetsk and connects to several Donetsk. And so over here, this entire area is pretty sparse. There aren't that many houses. You do have some quarries, nature reserves, landfills, and such in this entire open area that I'm going over right now. So it is an area where the Russians have been trying to advance around because you don't really have these nodes of defense in towns or in cities that Ukraine could sort of dig in. But there are still some trench systems over here that were overrun recently, and another issue that is presented by the fact that this entire area is open and there's no cover is that some of the Ukrainian artillery could be used to fire upon these advancing reconnaissance units, or they could utilize drones. So, and a lot of these videos that are being released, because I've seen a lot of videos released, especially from the Ukrainian side, of them either firing from drones or artillery onto these advancing Russian groups, and they are usually in small groups. You could say that they're just squads in terms of size. So the units that I've seen are like the 113th Territorial Defense Brigade, which is stationed around Ozaryanivka, Kordyumivka. They've been able to hold the line pretty well over here to prevent a Russian advance across the water canal in this specific area, because if the Russians were able to cross over here, they would be able to threaten the Ukrainian defensive positions that are just to the north of Toretsk. So by keeping them at bay near Ozaryanivka and Kordyumivka, it does present an issue for them. Like, they can't take Delivka either, or Bilahora in that case. So you're seeing most of the advances going on a bit further up to the north. And then in those videos, you have some units like 113th, but also like the 45th Artillery Brigade, showing how they're targeting the Wagner group. Probably might be also some Russian regulars in there. But in terms of the scouts operating in this area, I would assume that they're probably from this unit called Rusich, which is a part of Wagner Group. And I think that's just because they're designated as the sabotage reconnaissance unit of the Wagner Group. And they're also one of the more elite units in the Wagner Group. They've been around for many years by now. They have experience in other countries. And so they're not actually the prisoners that were recruited. They have more experience. So either way, we know that the Russians have been able to get a foothold in this quarry over here, and that they are very close to this forest over here. This forest is important because if the Russians can advance over here without being noticed, then they can actively threaten the town of Ivanivske, try to flank it, and reach this chalk quarry over here, and then from there just attack the town itself. So most people would probably expect an assault head-on onto Ivanivske that would sort of occur first in the warehouses and then just penetrating deep into the residential areas. But this is difficult because a lot of the Ukrainian formations that were able to retreat out of Klishchivka, they have regrouped in Ivanivske, and they are mainly centered in this axis. So if you want to flank them, that would probably be a better idea. The Ukrainians were able to retreat from Klishchivka without suffering that many losses. They weren't encircled or anything. And so they have a lot of freed up units in this area that could be used to defend Ivanivske. So flanking it could actually present a good opportunity to potentially try to surround those forces. And because you don't have that much of a Ukrainian emphasis on defense in these forested areas, you could potentially see a further advance by the Wagner group along the water canal that could branch off into Stupochki or into Ivanivske, as I said. The issue is that it would be pretty overextended because the main sort of hub for coordination, command, supply at this point is around Kordyumivka, which was recently taken. And now you could say by extension also Klishchivka. But those are pretty far away from these forests over here. And there aren't many towns in between that could be used as sort of a coordinating point. So that could be an issue that's presented by that. But nobody would really expect the Wagner group to advance in between these two dense urban areas. And put up a sort of threat to Chasiv Yar before they were completed with Bakhmut and took Bakhmut over. So if there was an assault first on Chasiv Yar, that could divert attention away from Bakhmut, and it could also present an opportunity to cut off the final road towards Bakhmut. But again, this is all hypothetical, but it seems like it is possible given the recent advances. Now, in Bakhmut itself, Ukrainians are putting up a very solid defense in the southern part of the front. There's been no changes at all. Over here, there's just been some minor changes around Zabakhmutka district with the Russians trying to incrementally advance. It is house-to-house combat. That's a given by now. But again, the pace has been incredibly slow. The area where it's been the fastest, as I've said before, is in the north. This entire area is called the Miaskombinat district. Compared to some other districts, this area is less sparsely populated. The entire eastern part of Bakhmut is less sparsely populated than the west. In the west, you have some pretty high apartment buildings, hotels, schools that would make for good defensive positions. In the east, it's more of just like single family houses. So especially in the northern part of Miaskombinat district, it is pretty sparse. There were some forested areas that could be used as cover to advance. So now this forest over here that I'm going over, this one over here, has mainly been taken over by the Russians. There might be some sort of resistance in the south. And this gives the Russians the opportunity to flank the Ukrainian formations that have been fighting around this pond over here. So you see this pond, the Ukrainians have been able to hold the Russians at bay here for like the past month and a half, because that's when the Russians were really starting to advance towards the industrial district and taking over the art winery, Siniat, ALC. But they tried to cross over the pond, but the Ukrainians put up a very stiff defense over here, especially due to the fact that they had some of their sabotage units and some of their reconnaissance units engaged in these like drone attacks or artillery attacks that were pretty accurate, and they were preventing any sort of frontal assaults on eastern Bakhmut. So what I think they're doing is they're trying to attack from this part over here, the northern part of Miaskombinat district. First of all, to stretch the Ukrainians thin, but then also to take the entire area over in order to push out the Ukrainians from their fortified positions over here. And so they've had some success in that, given the fact that they've been able to take over several blocks in the past week. There's a video over here that was geolocated. I have the link over here. It shows shelling in this road over here. I don't actually know which side was being shelled. The person who posted this, he said that it was Ukrainians that were shelling the Russians, but this can't be confirmed. Either way, it shows that this is the general area where the fighting is going on, and so I'm inclined to believe that the map is reflective of this. Now, we have this meat processing plant over here. This is one of the main defensive positions for the Ukrainians in this part of Bakhmut. So the Russians are trying to advance towards it and take it over. And then from there, it's just a bunch of different houses. You have over here some other factory or plant. I'm not exactly sure what it is. There's a school as well. You have a restaurant. You have this small park over here. None of this is too significant, and it's just going to be overrun one by one at this point. Now, the Russians are very close to the Bakhmutovka River, but you don't really expect, or you wouldn't really expect them to cross over the river at this point, because this is really the lowest elevated area in all of Bakhmut city. And given the fact that the Ukrainians are stationed in some of these high apartment buildings, they would be able to easily fire upon any crossing Russian soldiers, which is why the main focus right now is just on consolidating gains in the eastern part of Bakhmut. But let's move up a little, talk about Parasukivka. Parasukivka, basically acknowledged by everyone as a gray zone at this point. Both sides. There isn't really a clear-cut map that could show what's going on over here, because these fields in between are probably contested at the moment, and there might even be some forward Russian attacks onto the residential area. And so I just want to talk about the significance of Parasukivka now. You can see Parasukivka, it is a train hub. Not that there are many trains supplying Bakhmut at the moment, but there's also a road over here that would connect Parasukivka to northern Bakhmut. So in that regard, it is important. At this point, it's probably not being used because it is so close to the front line. But you see there is one road over here. And then you have this rail bridge that was destroyed about 2 months ago. So either way, supplies have been effectively cut off, but they will be completely cut off from the north once Russia is able to take over Parasukivka. Because you see there's a road junction over here just to the west of Parasukivka. So in theory, supplies could still come in from this road over here, and then they could go through here, for instance. And so if Russia is able to take over Parasukivka and reach this junction over here, or not, they don't even have to reach the junction. They could just take all of Parasukivka, and that would just basically neuter whatever supplies could cross over here because they'd just be fired upon. So that's the significance of Parasukivka. A lot of the retreating units from Soledar and other such areas have regrouped in Parasukivka, and they are mainly centered around this main industrial facility. There's a mine over here, there's a school, there's a hospital, there's a stadium, and it is a pretty good area just to regroup. And they're also stockpiling on a lot of their weapons in this area, and they're trying to ration them because there is a bit of a shortage. Actually, let's look at Google Earth. Here you can see how this area looks like. So this is where you have a lot of the Ukrainians sort of dug in at the moment. And they're going to try to put up a resistance over here. And they're aided by the fact that they still have positions in Krasnohora. The Russians, they took over the northern part of Krasnohora, but the main residential areas of Krasnohora are still under Ukrainian control. So they're trying to hold on to it tooth and nail in order to buy time for the grouping in Parasukivka. Now, moving north, in the past day or so, the Russians have been able to take over basically all of the land in between Soledar and the road that runs through Blahodatne over here. So in certain areas, they were able to cross the Bakhmutovka River. As I said before, it's pretty narrow. It's not that difficult to cross over. And the Wagner group, they claim to have taken over all of Blahodatne. I don't know if this is true because in that case, then they would have positions that were very close to the Ukrainian fortifications and the Ukrainian heights, so they would be exposed. But it's not like there are any Ukrainians in Blahodatne either. So this, again, basically cuts off this road from the north. It's not like it was being used anyway, but now it's physically cut off. And mainly, the Ukrainians are just grouped in this area over here. This area is on a relatively high elevation compared to the Bakhmutovka River, so it is a good position to fire upon advancing Russian forces. There's actually a geolocation of Ukrainian artillery targeting the Russians as they were crossing over the river. And so assaulting it head-on is not a good idea. But if you look to the south, the Russians took over the road over here, just to the south of Blahodatne and south of the fortifications. So they could try to cross over here and try to flank the fortifications that were built in this area. Because these fortifications, they are very haphazardly built. They were not planned. They were just quickly built as the Russians were advancing through the northern part of Soledar. So they aren't that extensive. So you could just flank it from the south, and they're not even that intricate, not that strong, not that much equipment there. And again, the Ukrainians in this area are very fatigued from, first of all, fighting in Soledar and now trying to hold on to these defensive areas. So it could be difficult to hold on to these positions, especially if the supply lines are cut. Look, this is where they're situated. And are there any roads leading to this area? No, there's just open fields that could be used in theory to supply some lighter supplies. At the same time, the Russians are trying to advance to Mykolaiivka and Razdelivka. As of now, they've been pushed back by the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade. The 10th Mountain Assault Brigade has a pretty strong artillery grouping that has been able to spot advancing columns of Russian infantry fighting vehicles and tanks and other such cars and equipment. And so that's been a part of the reason why the Russians are not have been able to advance in a certain area. But either way, all sides are agreeing that there are attacks in the direction of Mykolaiivka and Razdelivka. Taking over these towns would give Russia a good position to flank Vesele, which is really a thorn in Russia's back, because they want to take over Vesele, and then they'd basically have complete control over this entire open area in between this rail line and this rail line. It could give the Russians an opportunity to advance along here, along these open fields, parallel to the chain of towns over here. And the final goal of all of this would basically be to reach the town to the north called Seversk, which is the main defensive node in the northern part of the BAKHMUT line. So taking over Seversk is something that could occur, or at least flanking it is something that could become a reality if the Russians are able to continue applying pressure to take over Sele. We've seen now reports from Russian side that they have been able to consolidate full control of Blahodatne and Ahirne Brestove. I already had all these towns under Russian control, but this just further confirms that the Russians are conducting offensive operations in this area. They're also trying to attack Spirny, although they haven't had any success yet. The Ukrainians are putting up a hell of a fight over here. So that's just the quick summary of the situation over here. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.